Welcome to the AI Energy and Climate Podcast, a special series from the DSR Network hosted by David Sandalow.
The digitization of information is the fundamental change. AI is a dramatic leap forward, but it's part of the same continuum, which is the digitization. Now, what I think is really, really, really important here in terms of analogies and in terms of saving the world from climate catastrophe is this. In order to have the digitization of communications, in order for that to happen, it was necessary that the stranded assets of the entire analog infrastructure be abandoned. They had to be thrown away by the proprietors.
Introduction of you, and then we'll go. Hi, I'm David Sandalow, and this is the AI Energy and Climate Podcast. I first met Arun Majumdar more than 15 years ago when we both served at the U.S. Department of Energy. Arun was the inaugural director of ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, charged with funding innovative clean energy technologies. And I watched with admiration as Arun shaped the agency's technological vision. He hired talented staff, won bipartisan support for ARPA-E, and much more. Since that time, Arun has worked at Google and at Stanford University, where he's now the inaugural dean of the Doerr School of Sustainability. I recently spent a day at Stanford, both at the Doerr School and at the Institute for Human-Centered AI, and was deeply impressed with the huge amount of activity underway at Stanford on AI, energy, and climate change. And so I'm especially excited to welcome my former colleague and friend Arun Majumdar to the AI, Energy, and Climate Podcast. Arun, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Great to see you.
Well, thanks for joining. And so I was looking at your bio on the Stanford website, which says that your current research focuses in part on, quote, efforts to leverage modern AI techniques to develop and deliver energy and climate solutions. So what are you working on?
Yeah, so I got pulled into AI by my students and postdocs. They're all over this, and I was not doing AI before. And one of my colleagues out here, Ram Rajagopal, and I, we collaborate a lot, and our joint students pulled me into this. So we started off by looking at satellite imagery, and our first project was that led to a whole development of something called deep solar. We developed a convolution neural network to identify solar panels from satellite imagery, and then we generated the largest data set of the GPS location and size of every solar panel in the United States. And these included rooftop, included utility scale solar, and over time, that's called deep solar. Deep solar plus plus was the evolution over time of solar deployment. And that allowed us to understand the correlation, frankly, between policy measures and solar adoption. Also allowed us to look at the demographic data, how income level correlated with this, and then we wrote a paper of how to provide access to clean solar electricity to those communities that don't have access to. Clearly, they cannot afford rooftop, but other ways of having access to solar clean electricity is something that we worked on. We developed something called Deep Grid, which is from satellite imagery and street view, identify and map out both the transmission network, which is better known, but more importantly, the distribution network, and where undergrounding is taking place, where undergrounding has not taken place, and then correlating that with a wildfire risk to see where undergrounding needs to happen in terms of hotspots for wildfire risk. And so, which is highly relevant for California. In fact, we focused on California, and also came up with understanding of how to leverage the current policy to finance undergrounding, which is right now is being done by local household income, and thereby there's some inequities because of that. So that's kind of how we got into it. Currently, some of my students are looking at when there's an emergency, whether it is wildfire or tornado and others. What is the information that is needed for people to act? And that information is really important. As you know very well, David, when we were there in Washington, and first of all, thank you for your service. I know you've served in many different capacities. But when we were there, and I had just left Washington, there was Superstorm Sandy, and at that time there was a lack of information. Of some gas stations had gas and no power, other gas stations had power and no gas. The response is totally different. So trying to come up with a package and protocol for information exchange in an emergency is super important. But it also depends on understanding how humans behave. So we have a project going on using learning algorithms, deep large language models to emulate what a society or a community could behave like as a group or individuals, and what kind of help we can provide when there's an emergency of those kinds.
Yeah, I remember back in Superstorm Sandy, we were literally relying on people walking around with cell phones reporting what gas stations had electricity and what gas stations didn't. It was a very low-tech way of collecting information. The data set are so important for projects like this, Arun, and I wonder first, what type of data sets did you need for your Solar Plus project, and are there data sets that could be used for this type of project around the world, do you think, or is this more limited to places like the United States?
Oh, I think the data sets in the first case was about satellite images, and as long as in the visible scale, it's easy to see not only solar panels, wind turbines, and essentially we're building the solar atlas. Oh, sorry, the energy atlas, including other plants, natural gas and nuclear plants, etc. So the data sets is satellite imagery. I think sometimes the access to the data sets is hard because it's not in the right format. So we put all our data of all the solar panels, etc., onto a public website called Data Commons, which we were helped by Google. Google has developed this public platform. It's for free, and you could use your own domain. You got to pay for it, but it's a schema essentially for data, and then you can do data sharing. The only thing we had to be careful about is not to give GPS location for privacy reasons, but we did it based on census tract, and we published this data, and then we also put our algorithm on GitHub so that everyone could use it. So when we published the first paper, Germany came and said that, hey, we want to do this. Can you do this for us? City of Los Angeles came, can you do this for us? And I said, we can't do it for all, but here's the algorithm, and you use your own data sets to get it done.
It's a great example of how universities can make a difference in the world. And I wonder more broadly, what's happening at the Doerr School on this intersection between AI, energy, and climate?
Oh, a huge amount. We have, tens of, when I say tens, it could be like 30, 40 faculty members working at the intersection of AI for climate, energy, other water, etc. Minerals. We have a workshop, we have a program called Mineral X, which uses AI to identify where the critical minerals are likely to be found, which is super important right now in the changing energy mix and the supply chain that is needed. We have people looking at AI and predicting what the climate, when are we likely to reach 1.5, or we're already at 1.5, but 2 degrees Celsius, because while we have climate models, not all it doesn't capture all the physics, or there are some missing information that is needed to run the whole model. So people are now basically using AI and physics-based models in a hybrid way. And so I think we are seeing a lot of that. Then there are people looking at material science and new materials discovery, and we had a wonderful work in a collaboration between Stanford, Toyota, and others on thing like battery testing. If you want to test 1,000 cycles, if you wait for 1,000 cycles to happen, it takes a long time. But if you can get the first tens of cycles to tell you where this is going after 1,000 cycle, it saves a lot of time. And so I think that's another area. And there are many, many applications of this. Satellite imagery for agriculture. And how is climate affecting agriculture, and how to help farmers save cost, increase yield, all of that. So there's a huge element of AI for that as well.
We did this report called the AI for Climate Change Mitigation Roadmap, and we looked at about 8 different sectors and how AI could contribute to sustainability and climate change mitigation in each one of them. One of the conclusions that we came up with was that it's very important to bring together the AI experts with the energy climate domain experts, that you need a combination of expertise. And some people actually have expertise about the areas, but more people don't. And so bringing them together is important. Does that resonate with your experience at all at Stanford, or are you looking at ways to bring people with these different expertise sets together?
Absolutely. I think for example, from a data center side, which I know that you have been looking at as well, there's a huge amount of, so let me back up. The big challenge in data center right now, AI data centers, is access to power. Access to, doesn't need to be 99.999% reliable, but access to power is critical. So we have a program, which in fact we just launched a company called GridCare, which really looks at the flexibility of the grid using AI and other ways to identify capacity on the grid. And because oftentimes the grid is designed for the worst case scenario, and the probabilities of the worst case scenario are certainly non-zero. But even if you have the worst case scenario, there are other flexibility that you can introduce to take care of those incidents. So there's a lot more capacity that is out there in the grid than people think. And I think that's value to both the utilities as well as to the AI data center companies. So I think those are the kinds of things where you have people in the energy world who understand grid, people who do AI in the algorithmic world, and the policy people and the industry. And I think in that nexus, there's a lot of value that can be created.
Yeah, I've seen some very exciting results in a number of areas. One of them is dynamic line rating. And you've got to be very careful putting a lot of electricity through power lines, but with sensors out of the lines and then machine learning tools, you can really increase the amount of electricity you can put safely through a line. But you're really depending upon the machine learning tools there as part of that. And that's just one example of the type of thing you're talking about. Okay, here's a big picture question. I don't know what your answer or thoughts will be, Arun, but big picture, do you expect AI to be a net positive or a net negative when it comes to sustainability?
For the sustainability, it's hard to say right now. I would say it's in its early days. The way I look at it is that it's going to happen. And
AI is going to happen.
It's going to happen. I mean, or this version of AI, which large language models, et cetera, and other aspects of future developments, I think this is going to happen. So we have to accept that it's going to happen. And the question is, how do you leverage that to use it for energy, water, food, biodiversity, public health, ecology, climate change, predicting climate adaptation, resilience of community? I think it's a toolbox now that Sometimes it's it's transformational. Sometimes it may not be useful. It's just like any other tool, right? And so from a sustainability point of view, we have now an additional tool in the toolbox, which really helps us in many, many different ways. On the other side, flip side is that, okay, so how much electricity is it going to consume? Will it have climate implications? Will it add to the problem, or will it actually help? And this is something that we wrote, so I was, as you know, part of Jennifer Granholm's advisory board.
Yeah.
And she came to me and asked me, said, how do we think about it? It's a national security challenge. Because if you don't provide the electrical power, this is going to leave. And can we do it with clean energy? Because we don't want emissions. And there's a short-term, mid-term, long-term aspect to this. So we wrote a report, which is a public report. It's still on the DOE website. And I think the way to think about it is the following, that right now there's quite a bit of uncertainty, in fact, as to how much the power demand is going to be, because of the fact that there's a lot of efficiency in the algorithm. There is a lot of efficiency in the chips that are coming, but there's a growing demand. And so we don't know what the uncertainty is in the growth of the demand. So it could be this steep or it could be that steep, but it is going to be growing. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to, of the industries that I know, this particular industry is keen on using electricity or generating electricity with as minimum of greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental. And the value that they created from the electricity is so much higher than the price of electricity that they're paying, that they may be able to do some things that are unique. So I look at this as both a potential issue with emissions, because right now one has to use gas to be able to do this. And you cannot go to clean electricity, and you can't go to nuclear right away. So gas and renewables is really the only way to, or geothermal. It could be the only way to do it. But then long term, you could get to nuclear. And that could act or could have storage and flexibility. And so that could become a market for nuclear and new grid scale storage. So there's an opportunity out there as well. So I think that's the landscape that we're in right now.
You mentioned this report that you led for the Department of Energy on these topics, and I commend it to everybody, and we'll put a link in the show notes. I'm curious, you mentioned nuclear. What time frame do you foresee for nuclear being able to support some of this?
I don't think anything before 2030.
Yeah.
Because of the process that we go through for safety reasons and other reasons, all the licensing process, et cetera. So I think, but there's going to be increasing things in the pipeline out there. But 2030 onwards, we can expect some nuclear. And frankly, right now, the biggest challenge in nuclear is the market. If you can get a market for nuclear, someone's willing to pay for the first 10 or 20. So I think there's an opportunity for a private-public partnership. I'm so glad to see Secretary Wright, Chris Wright, leaning into nuclear and AI. And so I think there's an opportunity that is, one should avail of this opportunity.
Well, that kind of previewed the next question I was thinking of asking you, which, because I was reading in the past couple of days some things you've written recently, and you said recently, I'll quote it, you said, "We're at an inflection point for climate, artificial intelligence, and government engagement." And I wonder what you mean by that specifically, especially with respect to government engagement.
Well, certainly we are at an inflection point on I think in the AI and climate. We have now reached 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was predicted to be reached by 2035. So we're already there. So there are some, it's kind of, going faster than we thought. On the government engagement that we are seeing right now, almost, on a sometimes weekly basis, that how we engage with the federal government is changing, right? And I think it is a question on all of us and academia as to what our social contract is. And, out of the 20th century social contract that Stanford had, for example, with the federal government, and trying to fulfill that social contract of the 20th century. One of the outcomes of that is Silicon Valley, right? That's the outcome of it. Grew out of here, and that's what we were trying to fulfill our social contract, because we get the benefits from the federal government, and Silicon Valley really started with investment from the Department of Defense, and now we fulfilled that, and out of that was this amazing ecosystem out here, which has created so much of value, et cetera, right? We have to now look at what is a social contract of the 21st century. And as part of the social contract is our relationship with the federal government. And I think, what's happening now is that being, that question is being asked. And I think it's a worthy question to be asked. How do we give back, and what do we give back, and how? Right? And I think it's a question that we all have to answer. And the answering of the question, at least at Stanford, this started 2 years ago. And in fact, in many ways, the Doerr School is going to be part of Stanford's social contract in the 21st century, which means we have to think about, what do people need? What do people want, right? How do we create value for a society, not just in California? Okay, so I think that is what we are going through right now. And it's a terrific question to ask, and we have to respond to that.
It's very thoughtful, Arun. And a final question related to that, building on your role as an educator, how do you see training students and teaching students evolving in the age of AI?
Well, I think there are many dimensions to that. AI is going to be integrated into the educational thing. In fact, we have a Graduate School of Education, and this is an inflection point for the Graduate School of Education, because you can think about AI in the classroom. I just finished teaching a class last quarter where we basically said that, look, you can use AI. You can answer all your exams and your project with AI. You can do that with AI, but you may not learn anything. And you can not use AI at all, and you'll be slower, right? So we ask the students, tell us, where do you think the right use of AI would be, where you can move faster, you can be more productive, but at the same time, you also learn about how to make critical decisions on issues that are related to energy, right? Which are multidimensional to start with. And I think those critical thinking skills are absolutely critical for our students, important for our students, and that we will emphasize, and we'll use AI to help them in going faster in certain ways. On the other hand, the AI in education, we are going to see privatization of tutors, right, to help them. Again, AI assisted things that are specific, targeted to certain students. And I think that can really revolutionize education in many ways. So that there are many, many dimensions to this.
Well, I think people can see with your thoughtful answers, Arun, what effective leader you are, and how you've so effectively led a number of different institutions. And you've been generous with your time. It's time for us to start to wrap up. And so I'm closing this podcast, each episode, with two questions for each guest. One of them is, how are you using AI in your day-to-day life?
In my day-to-day life, it's frankly, every time I do a Google search, I'm using AI, right? Without even knowing about it. I use my email server is Gmail, even though it's a Stanford.edu. If it can complete those sentences for me, that's great. I can go faster, right? So I think those are the kinds of things that are already embedded. And somehow YouTube knows what kind of, English Premier League soccer game I want to watch. And that is, so those are the kinds of things that are, we are being touched by AI without even knowing about it.
Do you have a team? What team are you a fan of?
Oh, Manchester City.
Ah, Great. And a final question, which I previewed in advance. Could you please recommend to our listeners 3 books, reports, or articles that you think might be particularly interesting? Anything old or new on any topic?
I would recommend 2 books. One is I finished, listening to it last year, called Leadership in Turbulent Times, and where they profile 4 U.S. presidents, starting with Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, and Lyndon Johnson. And they all were unique in their own respects, but they went through some turbulent times, and how they responded, just a masterpiece in that. And the other ones are setup books that I really appreciate, and it's certainly the history of humanity, but also looking ahead. Are the books, the Harari books, are worth reading, and he also touches on AI and the implications of that on society. But his first book on Sapiens is really unique in many ways, because it tells you why the difference between humans and other animals, and how we have come to build this society that we have. It's beautifully written.
Yuval Harari, I think. Yeah, Yuval Harari.
Yeah.
Well, Arun, it's great to chat. Great to see you, and really appreciate everything that you've done and everything I've learned from you over the years. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us on the AI Energy and Climate Podcast.
Thank you, David.